Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Progress City Radio Hour. We're here in the town hall. The nice air conditioning in the town hall. It's really blowing today. I'm here with my brother, Michael. Michael, how are you doing today?
Doing great. You know, these solar installations here in Progress City makes it guilt-free to run the air conditioning here in the town hall as cold as we possibly want it to be. And we do.
Yeah, I'm really hoping we get the future site of the Disney Channel's Teacher of the Year Awards, because I think our facility really lives up to the bill.
That would be fantastic. Co-sponsored by Tornante Media Empire. We need to get Mr. Eisner to give us a nod there for the teacher awards.
That's right. We're just one step away from the teacher awards these days. So we're continuing forth into this year. We slower pace than off our lead pace, but we are back with more town hall. I love the town hall, Michael.
Oh, I love the town hall. Especially we've had such great people to speak with, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I like that we're kind of getting back into our rhythm just a little bit. So I like that, and have great people to talk to.
We do. And before we get to who we're going to talk to, we're going to switch it up. Now is the time of the episode where we check in with our Patreon and see if we have anybody signed up. Michael, has anyone signed up for the Order of the Chili Bowl lately?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, in our last episode, we talked about sponsorship deals for the parks, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And, our sponsors are our patrons. And this month, we'd like to welcome Samantha. Thank you, Samantha, for joining up. Very excited to have you. She'll be joining all our other patrons in a slew of benefits, including early access to episodes and a lot of other things. Of course, at the silver level, we get our exciting monthly live stream where we all get together with a group of people in the chat and show some rare video and photos and artwork and just have a good time, have a few laughs, and have a good chat with some great people.
And all you people who are on our Patreon or listen to an entire episode, you'll know at the end we usually do this kind of thing. But also you'll know that, not only do you get upcoming live streams, you get access to our entire back catalog of live streams, non-live streams, and you can go back in time. And if you want to find out more about Main Street USA, maybe there is a live stream about that. There's all kinds of stuff, and we have some guests on our live streams. It's a whole nother sphere of material, Michael.
That's right, and I did notice that after our last month live stream, when it went up, it was our 50th live stream. So that is literal days worth of viewing, should you so choose to immerse yourselves in our oeuvre. So a lot of content there if you so choose to join. So visit us, find out more, patreon.com/Progress City USA. That's where we're at.
Thanks to all our sponsors, you card holding members of the club. It's just like a Mickey Mouse Club.
Exactly, right.
Well, we are in the town hall, as I have said, as you have said, as we have said. Who are we going to talk to today, Michael?
Well, Jeff, this is an exciting one. This is somebody I've wanted to have on the town hall for a long time. Several years ago now, I was looking through some old memos about the Journey into Imagination attraction, much beloved. Of course, we've talked about that on several episodes before. And, memos from back in the day during the creation of the attraction, and it name-checked a few people. It said, so-and-so is coming down. This was, Imagineering memo. So-and-so coming from Kodak. So I just, thought, I wonder, who are these folks? So I did some Googling and found some contact information for Mr. Bob Gibbons. And, he has some of his biographical information online. You can look that up. He's written about his own life, which is a fascinating one. So I got in contact with him and had a talk with him, and it was fantastic. So I knew as soon as I talked to him, we had to have him on the show. Bob worked for Kodak for many, many years. Very important and influential fellow over there at Kodak. And for the purpose of imagination, he was their point person working with WED Imagineering, working with Tony Baxter and his crew on the creation of this pavilion, which we all know and love so well.
And just what a guy. And just a great window onto Disney history and a history in his own right. So I know you all are going to enjoy this. We'll get right to it. Michael sits down with Bob Gibbons.
The connection between Kodak and Disney goes back a long way, right? It goes back to the early days of our company's founder, George Eastman. When I say our company, I mean Kodak, although I'm retired from Kodak, retired in 2010. And Kodak's founder, George Eastman, and of course, Disney's founder, Walt Disney. Walt Disney made movies, Kodak made film. We kind of needed each other, and the story goes, and I don't know if the story is true, and obviously there's no way to check it, but it's a great story, so who cares if it's true, right? Back in the early days, when Walt Disney was mortgaging everything he had to try to make his movies, he needed some film from Kodak and couldn't pay for it. So he came and he asked Kodak for the film on consignment. And Kodak didn't like to do that. So they bumped the decision up to George Eastman, as the story goes. And Eastman said, it looks like this young man has talent. Let's give him the film. And so Kodak gave, Disney the film. Obviously, they paid for it later. But that sort of began, I guess, a long and sort of mutually beneficial relationship, right? Because when Walt was preparing his dream of Disneyland, when he had that Wonderful World of Disney, or whatever the name of the TV show was called on Sunday, Kodak was a sponsor, of course, and Kodak was one of the original sponsors of Disneyland. We were the so-called partner for cameras and film. It was interesting because, when Kodak finally left Disneyland in 2012, the end of 2012, when Kodak was a very different company from the company I knew, and was going through a bankruptcy and so forth, and they left the sponsorship of Disney, they were one of the last three original sponsors of Disneyland, and the other two being Coca-Cola and Carnation, who of course became Nestle. But the interesting connection is Tony Baxter began his, Disney assignment, as it were, as an ice cream scooper for Carnation on Main Street. And then in August of 1965, incidentally, the year both he and I graduated from high school, in August of 1965, when Disney took over that ice cream operation, Tony became a Disney employee. And he, of course, had an illustrious career from there on. Now, so Kodak is working with Disney and everything's, going along well. And now Disney is deciding they're going to do EPCOT. And they come to Kodak as one of the major companies, and a company that's been associated with them for a long time. And they say, how would you like to sponsor a pavilion at EPCOT? And Kodak says no. And probably for a good reason. Disney wanted $10 million, not an insignificant amount of money. But Kodak had a lot of other sponsorships at that time. This is the late 70s, I guess, maybe 76 or so. Anyway, Kodak is a sponsor of the Olympics and America's Junior Miss and the Eastman Award for basketball and some football and everything. Lots of sponsorships going on. So anyway, Kodak says no. But meanwhile, Walt Fallon, who was the Kodak CEO at the time, Walt Fallon was on the board of General Motors. And Walt goes to a General Motors meeting, and General Motors is bragging about the fact that they are now a sponsor of this Disney project called EPCOT, and they're going to do the transportation pavilion and so forth. And Walt comes back to Kodak and he says to his guys, why can't we do something like that? Right? So suddenly all these guys who thought it was a bad idea think it's a terrific idea. Okay? Right. Because you know how that goes in companies, right? Mm-hmm. And so Anyway, so they asked Disney to boy, we'd like to get involved, send us a proposal and so forth. And Disney, of course, sent Spaceship Earth. They sent a proposal for Spaceship Earth because at that time they're looking for a sponsor. They've got this well-developed project and so forth. So in comes this proposal to a guy who heads up the sponsorship team at Kodak. His name is Dick Bartlett. And I know Dick. I'm a young writer, for audiovisual programs, slide presentations, and so forth. And I know Dick. And Dick sees me in the hall one day, and he says, "Hey, I got this proposal from Disney." He said, "I know you like to look at different creative things." He said, "Why don't you take a look at it?" And so he sends me this proposal. Of course, it's wonderful pieces of art, and everything's really well thought out, as Disney Imagineers do. So I look at this thing and I say, first of all, we should get involved, right? But so I write Dick a long letter, a long note, which I still have someplace, that basically says, yeah, we should do this, but not space. Space is not our business, right? And so I didn't know a lot about EPCOT other than what I read in the proposal. I didn't know a lot about Disney, but I did know this. Disney would never let us do something that was blatantly commercial. They just wouldn't do it, right? So why propose something that's blatantly commercial? That wouldn't work. So anything that just promotes photography, which of course was our business, wasn't going to work. So my question was how to do something around photography that's not so commercial that it just automatically gets rejected. So I start floating around a bunch of ideas because I love ideas and kicking around ideas. And what I write is this, and I'm going to read this to you because this is right from my letter. It says, "Space is not our business. Kodak's business is tied to human imagination, and visitors should be given the impression that each possesses a unique imagination that can be creatively developed and expressed." So that, the idea was, why don't we do something around imagination, among other things? Now, I don't want to pretend I had I was that smart that I focused right in on imagination and knew exactly. I didn't. I honest to God didn't. But I had a lot of ideas. That was one of them. And of course, as so often happens in companies, that letter went into a black hole. Okay, I sent it to Dick and never heard anything. So finally, I run into Dick one day and I say, "Did you ever get that letter? I mean, did you read it? Oh yeah. He said, yeah. In fact, he says, Disney's coming in. They're going to make a proposal to us in about a week or so. Would you like to sit in on the meeting?" And it's like, yeah. And he said, "Yeah, I sent your letter to him." He said, "So I don't know, but why don't you join us?" So I said, "Yeah, it'd be wonderful." So at that time, I apologize for the length of my stories.
This is why I came to you. Yeah.
Cut me off and we can go someplace else. So at that time, when I was writing speeches for management, one of my jobs was to figure out if our CEO or our president, somebody was going to be speaking, who else was going to be sitting on the dais with him, for example. It was just my job, right? And so I thought, well, I wonder who's coming from Disney, right? So I thought, I'm going to see what I can find out. So I found out that John Hench was coming, that Marty Sklar was coming, that a guy by the name of John DeCure, I think his name was coming. Names that mean more to you. Well, I knew Marty fairly well. But anyway, and also, but when I checked with Disney people about so who are these guys? Because I didn't know. They said, so there's going to be a lot of there's going to be some senior managers there, but the guy you really want to watch out for is this young guy from the model shop. He's the real talent, right? And so that was my introduction to Tony Baxter. So we go into this meeting, and from the Kodak standpoint, the meeting is chaired by a guy by the name of Kay Whitmore. Kay was company president. And then Dick was there, and I was sitting in the back row thinking, this is wonderful. This is like the most fun you can have with your clothes on at Kodak, right? And so I'm sitting there, and John Hench and Marty Sklar and DeCur, I mean, they do this elaborate presentation on Spaceship Earth because they really, this is really well developed, and they really want Kodak to sponsor it, and they want somebody to sponsor it, and why not Kodak, right? So anyway, they go through this elaborate presentation, and then Tony Baxter stands up, right? And Tony's got, maybe he had more than this, but what I remember is he had one slide. And he had but the slide was a ballerina standing in a water droplet, pirouetting kind of in a water droplet, turning around in a water droplet at sunset. And the idea was he had something that was artistically beautiful, emotionally engaging, and technically interesting. He combined sort of photography and imagination in an image that said, look, there's something here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not sure Disney knew what was there. And I'm not sure Kodak knew what was there, but we saw something, a connection between photography and imagination that I think got everybody in the room thinking, yeah. This could be good. So when the meeting progresses, and there's lots of blah 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 and back and forth and all that kind of good stuff, and then at the end of the meeting, Marty, I guess, asked, all right, so A, is Kodak interested, and B, if they are interested, what are they interested in, right? And so Kay Whitmore, who is the president, of course, speaks for the company. He said, we're interested, because Walt told him, you should be interested, Kay. And Kay was the president, Walt was the CEO. He said, you should be interested. And Kay said, we're interested. And let's go with imagination, he said. So that was that. So Spaceship Earth and all the people kind of went away. But now remember, that's kind of what Disney knew. Maybe they knew more, but that's what we believe they knew at the time. That's what we knew at the time. And this is the summer of '79. And EPCOT is scheduled to open October 1st, 1982. We're running out of time, or at least Disney is running out of time, right? And we're real late to the party. And so Disney says, or Marty probably said, look, time is short. We got to be really careful we don't go down the wrong path, because you remember what happened with seas, how seas kind of was Tony's original concept for seas and so forth, and then the original concept for land, and all that had to be, kind of when Kraft came in, they said, wait a minute, this is a farm story. This is not a food fair story, or this is, anyway, Disney was saying, we don't have the time to go down the wrong path. We got to go down the right path. So would you, Kodak, send us a couple of people to work with us, at least at this early stage, to make sure that the direction we're headed is the direction you want us to head? So that's how I kind of got involved. So Kodak said, sure, we'll do that. So anyway, they asked three of us. They asked me, obviously. They asked a guy by the name of Greg DeNovis, who handled kind of the business side of sponsorships. So he was worrying about the money and all that. And then they had another person go, and he only went on one trip. His name was Neil Stalter. Neil's actually a good friend of mine. Neil was my boss at the time. So my job was to kind of watch out for the creative side of things. Greg's job was to watch out for the business side of things. And Neil Stalter was to keep an eye on me, because I think they considered me a bit of a loose cannon, and B, and I don't know why they ever got this idea, but my boss's boss told me this later on. They were thinking Disney was going to try to recruit me. Okay, now I don't know why Disney needed more people from Rochester, but in any event, they for some reason thought that was going to happen. But anyway, it didn't. Of course, there was no hint of that. But anyway, we signed for $10 million bucks, and we're off and running. So anyway, long answer to a short question. And anyway, so.
Well, no, I've always found it interesting that, you've mentioned a lot of these other pavilions, like With transportation, Disney wanted to do a transportation pavilion, so they went looking for transportation companies. They wanted to do an energy pavilion, so they went talking to energy companies. Same with things with health and land and everything else. With imagination, they wanted to work with Kodak. And it wasn't like they were fishing for an imagination pavilion sponsor.
Right.
The imagination was something that came specifically for Kodak.
Yeah.
And that's really different than the other pavilions.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. And yet, if you think of it, imagination is sort of fundamental to everything else that happened at EPCOT. I mean, it's like it was kind of the key. So, but I think, and again, you'd have to talk to Tony about this, but it would seem to me it was maybe more difficult to create an experience around this because it wasn't sort of a physical thing. I mean, the seas, you could go look at the seas and you know exactly what the seas look like, or transportation, depending on how you wanted to focus it, you knew what transportation was. With imagination, what is it?
Right.
And how do you go from a ballerina pirouetting on a water droplet at sunset to a whole attraction that, will communicate with people and, in a way they understand and leave them inspired? It's, it's part of the genius of Tony Baxter and Imagineering.
Well, talk about him a little, because obviously Tony's somebody that you were going to wind up working with for several years on this project. So tell me a little about your first impressions of the team, and just talk about Tony, because he's just such an amazing creative individual.
Yeah. Tony is an anomaly. I've spent a lot of time, Tony and I are, I'd like to say, friends, because we certainly go back and forth. And last time I saw him, I spent a day with him at Disneyland just a couple of months ago. And, I'd love to go up to his place and we just sit around and yak about things and whatnot. And he's good. But, the thing is, if I were as smart and as creative and as talented as him, I'd be insufferable. I mean, I just would be,
Yeah.
I mean, and yet he's not. He is such a nice, approachable, low key guy that, it's wonderful to kind of walk through the park with him at night. And we've done this several times, and just have people stop him and say, "Oh, Mr. Baxter, thank you for all you've done." Or, "Could I get a picture with you?" And the answer always is, "Yes, sure, of course." And he's an amazing talent. I think from the very beginning, it's funny because, what was originally intended as sort of one trip for me to go out there and meet with Disney and make sure we're all on track and then go away and go back to my regular job, became a kind of a 2-year assignment, flying back and forth every 3 or 4 weeks, meeting with Tony and the team, seeing what the progress was, and coming back and talking to Kay Wetmore, our president, about how things were going. And it's funny because almost every time I came back, Kay asked me the same question: "Is that Baxter boy still working for us?" Okay. I don't know if Kay ever remembered Tony's first name. Okay? He always called him that Baxter boy, because I think what Kay felt is if Tony's on the project, things are going well, right? But it was from the beginning. There's a lot of Imagineering, as you know, has a lot of really talented people, and I've met some Joe Rohdes and some of the guys who are really major, Eddie Sato, and some of the guys who are just major talents. And
love Eddie. Eddie was a beautiful guy.
Yeah, they are. They're great. They're great people. And but Tony from the beginning was the leader. Tony was somebody people looked up to, and it was kind of nice to know that he was leading our project, So yeah, he was a good guy, and it's funny. I want to, and if you don't want to hear the story, we'll talk about something else, but I'd love to talk about the story about how Dreamfinder and Figment sort of came to be.
Absolutely.
So we get out there. So Greg and Neil and I get out there, and we're going to go through this. We're going to go do a brainstorming session, right? Because Disney wants to hear our ideas, and we want to hear their ideas and swap ideas and so forth. And so we go into this room with about 25 or 30 people, and you can't brainstorm with 25 or 30 people. There's people who can't even find a chair, right? And
Right.
so they're standing along the walls, and so that lasts for about 5 minutes, and somebody decides, we can't do this. We got to get back together. We got to have a much smaller session on, let's pick a day, Thursday afternoon. So it turns out that Thursday afternoon, I go into a little room with Tony, Tad Stones, and Barry Braverman.
Okay.
And and we sit at this table, and Tony begins to sort of describe, some of his initial ideas, and these are initial ideas for how they'll develop imagination. And the idea is to play with people's imagination from the beginning to get people engaged. He starts and he tells a story about we're going to take the guests, and they're going to be riding in this ride vehicle, and they're going to go into a hollow log, and it's going to be pitch dark in there, and then they're going to start to hear this sound of this slapping sound that's going to sound like a train coming at them. It's going to get louder and louder and louder and louder. And, it's like they're just bracing for a moment of impact. And they look out through this knothole, and it's just like cattails slapping in the wind and stuff like that. So anyway, so we're going to do, that kind of, and so he's just brainstorming about, just throwing out ideas. And so I say, well, okay, but here's the problem. If we do something like that, and I think it's great to play with people's imaginations, especially in the dark and so forth, where they can't figure it out. I said, if there are young kids on board, they're going to be scared and they're going to cry. And because we had two young kids at the time, Jennifer and Tim were very young. And I said, they're going to cry. And so I said, now I can tell them a very a story. I can tell them a frightening story at night, but I'm there for them to hug. I'm their storyteller, right? They have some comfort there. It's like, oh, and so I said, we kind of need a storyteller, right? And Tony said, I know exactly what you're talking about. So he goes out and brings back this little carved figurine that Steve Kirk had made for Discovery Bay. And it's this Victorian gentleman, and he's got his top hat, and he's got this little flying this dragon sitting on his shoulder. Tony said, "This is our storyteller. This is Professor Marvel." Well, he didn't, eventually became Dreamfinder, but this is Professor Marvel, and he is our storyteller. So he's going to be the rational side of imagination, and this little dragon is going to be the child, the child. And so anyway, it's the thing I didn't realize is that when I said we needed a storyteller, I was playing right into Tony's hands. I mean, this was not my idea. This was an idea he had had forever, right? Because Tony, when you think about how Tony approaches things, this is my view of Tony, by the way. Okay. Tony starts out with emotion. He starts out, how can I make an emotional connection between people who are going to go through this experience and the story I have to tell? And then once I figure out how I'm going to make that emotional connection, who is going to be my storyteller to convey that, right? And so I think Tony recognized if there's going to be a lot of emotion, and there's going to have to be emotion if we play with people's imagination. There's always emotion in everything Tony does. He thinks in emotional terms, okay? I believe he thinks in emotional terms. But I think Tony recognized that, we need a storyteller. He had tried that when he did the original concept for Seas with Poseidon, right? Poseidon was going to do this. And then it was going to be a storyteller. And then, based on Charlton Heston's 10 Commandments kind of, storyteller. And then when he did the original concept for the Land Keeper was based on Dr. Lau or some, but anyway, one of his movie heroes. And so when I said we need a storyteller, it was like, oh yeah, suddenly he realized he needed a storyteller. The problem was, of course, at that time, Disney's directive was no new characters created for Epcot, right? We're not going to use any characters. Well, fortunately, Tony ignored that, or at least brought this out as a proposal to see what I thought. Well, I loved it, right? I loved it. He knew it was right because that's the way he thinks, right? So I did something that was purely accidental and crucial. It turned out to be crucial. I had some pictures taken because I said, look, this is such a good idea. I got to have some pictures of Dreamfinder and Figment because they're going to be they're going to be Kodak at Epcot. So we got a Disney photographer, Gary, somebody, I don't remember his name, although I remember he shot a lot of stuff for us. He was an official Disney photographer, so that was good. Anyway, he shot a bunch of pictures of Dreamfinder and Figment. I took them back with me to Rochester. Everybody else loved it. And, everybody, I mean, management, we didn't show it to everybody. Management loved it. We ended up showing it as part of a board of directors meeting. And then Marty got involved. Okay, Marty Sklar, okay? Mm-hmm. And so Marty was furious, of course, because he had already told Tony no characters for the seas, no characters for the land. And now Tony has characters for imagination. And so Tony says to Marty wisely, okay, I understand, but you don't have to convince me. You have to talk to the Kodak board of directors because They love these guys, okay? And so Marty, in his wisdom, decided not to talk to the Kodak. Now, I don't mean to make Marty a scapegoat. I don't. I have a lot of respect for Marty. Marty made Epcot happen and so forth. But the point was, naively, I had gone so far as to show these to the Kodak board of directors before we had any kind of official approval. So Tony will tell you, together, in fact, I have a thing from him once saying, together we developed Figment. Well, but let's be really clear. Tony created Figment. I simply was his protector.
Right.
Okay. I mean, and when Figment was very new, he needed both. So that was, anyway.
It's so funny to me that they would not have wanted original characters when Figment wound up being this huge superstar, still is to this day superstar.
Well, he is, yeah.
Yeah. So you get this Professor Marvel character and his little green dragon Figment, or not even Figment yet, just a little green dragon. Yeah. So how do they become Dreamfinder and Figment that we know?
Well, I think they went through several iterations, right? I mean, because first of all, if you look at the original character, the original carving, I should say, by Steve Kirk, Figment is kind of reptilian, right? I mean, he's kind of scraggly looking, right? And he doesn't look at all like a child. So he needed to be softened. He needed to be made more childlike, okay? And that's where, obviously, the Disney Imagineers got involved and softened him through, various, iterations, carvings and so forth. And Blaine Gibson obviously made carving and whatnot of them. So he had to kind of go through that. Dreamfinder, it's interesting because Tony will tell you, or at least Tony's told me, that he always saw him as kind of Santa Claus. He always saw him as kind of a wise old man, but wearing a top hat and a vest and so forth. I mean, not dressed as Santa Claus, but as a wise, experienced person. He was the rational side of imagination, right? It was John Hench who said he needs red hair. Okay. Tony was never a big fan, my understanding. Tony was never a big fan of the red hair, but hey, he was a young guy and John Hench was the experienced guy, and John said, let's do it. And so we did it, or they did it, or somebody did it. Anyway, but I think there were a couple of sort of major steps along the way. I mean, the first thing that had to happen, I mean, we had these characters who could tell a story, but what story were they going to tell, right? I mean, so the story became very crucial. And Disney spent about 6 months trying to figure out what imagination was. I mean, how did it work? How did how does this work? Because again, Tony's genius is telling universal stories that connect with people emotionally. That's what he knows how to do, right? And I don't just mean Tony, because a lot of people worked on this, but it was Tony's leadership and Tony's guidance and Tony's inspiration and Tony's genius so anyway, so once they all sort of figured out that, look, there are 3 steps in imagination. You kind of gather, you store, and then you recombine. I mean, and no matter what you do, whether you're baking a cake or you're building an atom bomb, or you gather, you store, and you recombine. Okay? Once they decided that, then that's the story that Dreamfinder and Figment are going to tell. And Dreamfinder is going to try to keep it sort of rational and straightforward, and this is how things happen. And Figment's going to be this, bring a dash of childish delight, to use the terminology, to the whole thing. And one of the breakthroughs was, and oh, by the way, when you first meet Dreamfinder on his gathering mission on the dream vehicle he's flying, Figment is created right before your eyes, right? They gather the wings and they gather the things, and boom, and up comes Figment, right? And so Figment is kind of created from your own imagination, or from the various elements of imagination. So, anyway, they kind of came together. So Dreamfinder was Professor Marvel. Disney didn't own the rights to Marvel at the time, so he had to be renamed. So he was renamed Dreamfinder, and then Figment, became Figment. So it was,
and he got turned purple along the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So anyway, great story. So anyway, so Tony's in this presentation with Disney management and saying, okay, so now we see Figment coming down from, whatever, a cloud or whatever. And one of the Kodak managers goes, wait a minute. No, we don't. And Tony goes, what? He goes, Figment is green. Figment cannot be green. Green is the color of Fuji. Fuji's Kodak's biggest competitor in the amateur photography business. Figment cannot be green. Figment has to be some color associated with Kodak, like yellow or red or black. And so Disney, of course, made him purple. So,
and it worked out great.
It was good.
Well, one of the things that I personally admire a lot about Tony, and this goes to the reusing the Professor Marvel character and the dragon, having those sort of on the shelf as a thing to use. He knows when an idea is good, and he will fight for it. If it doesn't work in one project, he'll keep it in the back of his mind because I think of the imagination building these sort of giant crystals. He had wanted to do that with the land. He had wanted to do that in Discovery Bay. He knows a good idea. He knows like with Professor Marvel becoming Dreamfinder, he can hold on to an idea and repurpose it and really make it work once he finds the right project for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think because if you think of the original land pavilion, it had multiple crystals. I don't know, 6 or 8 or some number. And then when it was time to do imagination, he repurposed those crystals, but in a way that they looked like silver halide crystals, which was the basis for photography, where the chopped off sort of tops and stuff. So, I mean, he knows not, it's not that he fights blindly for something that he believes in, but it's that he knows how to change something to make it right, not gee, it fit over here and why, he knows how to modify ideas. He knows how to work with ideas. He understands what a good idea is. There are people in this world who know a good idea after the idea has been proven good, right? Yes. After everybody says, oh yeah, that's great. That's really good. Then they go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I always knew that was a good idea. Tony's not like that. Tony knows a good idea from a bad idea right from the start,
right?
And he knows how to make a good idea better, and he knows how to reject a bad idea. So, and yet he does it so kindly. I mean, he's really gentle about things. I mean, one of the things I found in working with Imagineering, though, is that Marty didn't necessarily want any of my ideas. I knew that, but that was fine. I mean, it was good. But the one idea that I do take credit for is that when the pavilions were first developed, they had these wonderfully colorful names like transportation, energy, seas, land, right? And ours was called imagination, right? Well, that didn't seem too magical to me. So one night I went back in Rochester, our young son, Tim, who had to be, Tim was born in 1975, so he had to be about 4 years old. I was pulling him in a cart. We used to go walk around the block in our neighborhood at night. And so I was pulling my cart, and we were on the street going along, and this plane flies overhead. And Tim says to me, Daddy, where's that plane going? And, I don't have any idea. So as a dad, one of the things you do is you deflect questions like that, right?
Sure.
You say, Tim, that plane is on a very long journey. And he says, yeah, where? I said, where would you imagine it go? And he said, well, I don't know. And I started to think, I thought, journey and imagine. And then somehow those go. So I thought, journey into imagination. What about that, right? So next time Marty and company came to Rochester for a presentation to Kay Whitmore, I proposed, what about journey into imagination for the name of our pavilion? And Marty, bless his heart, said, we like that. Can we use it? And Kay, of course, said, sure, because he, was in a position to give away all intellectual property for
right.
So, yeah.
That's fantastic.
So anyway, so that's my piece of what's there. Journey into Imagination was mine. So
that's wonderful. I wanted to ask about these visits because you had Imagineering coming to Rochester, like you say, and one of the funny, it's kind of a funny thing. I've seen some old memos from this time on the Disney side of things discussing, all right, we've got to go and we've got to be like well dressed and behaved and that sort of thing. But one thing that they said that their Kodak friends were telling them at Disney was that management at Kodak was really engineering focused at the time. And they were really into the sort of R&D. They wanted a focus on that. Was that true? How did that affect the way that this sort of interaction between Imagineering and Kodak happened?
Well, I think that a couple things. First of all, that is true. Okay, that the CEO, Walt Fallon, was an engineer. He was replaced by Colby Chandler, who was an engineer. Who was replaced by Kay Whitmore, who was an engineer. So lots of engineering people at the helm. So, but let me just respond to a couple of crazy things. First of all, so we go out to Disney for these meetings, and we show up the first day in suits and ties, right? And the Imagineers don't dress in suits and ties. They don't even own suits and ties, right? So anyway, so they show up dressed the way you guys dress, and then but then the next day we think, oh man, well, maybe we should just wear open neck shirts and roll up our sleeves and stuff like that. So we show up with rolled up sleeves and they show up wearing ties, right? And so anyway, so finally we just said, okay, let's figure this thing out, right? So anyway, so we decided, when in California, dress like you belong in California. But in any event, I don't think there was any problem. I think we knew from the very beginning this was going to be different. This was not going to be an engineering project. This was going to be a fun-filled project. I mean, remember when Kodak was about a I guess when I left there, they were about before I left there, they were about a $16 billion business. Okay. Of the 16 billion, the vast majority came from amateur photography for Kodak, for Kodak film and cameras for the amateur. Probably 9 billion of that came from that, and everything else was spread out among the other, entertainment imaging, which was a motion picture, was 1 billion, and so forth. Anyway, so Kodak was used to kind of dealing with the amateur photographer and so forth, and they knew that the purpose of EPCOT. I mean, let's face it, the reason we got involved in that was for sales, right? I mean, at that, there was a thing called the Wolfman Report at the time, and the Wolfman Report tracked all amateur film and camera sales in the United States, okay? And the Wolfman Report, which was not owned by Kodak or controlled by Kodak, or obviously Kodak contributed to it, said that there were 15 billion pictures taken in a typical year in the United States. And of those 15 billion, 4% were taken on Disney property.
Wow.
Now, okay, so that's 600 million pictures taken on Disney property. As I said one time, I said, does Kodak want to be the only cameras and film that are available where people are going to take 600 million pictures? I mean, that's a decision so simple even a vice president could make it, right? So anyway, we wanted to do that. So, I mean, it wasn't a case of, can we make this an engineering marvel? Although, one of the things at the last act, and I realize I'm jumping around here, I apologize for that, but the last act in the Journey ride is saying, what about science? You remember, what about science? Right. What about science? That was a direct quote. I mean, Tony will tell you, I remember coming to Kodak and we went through all this stuff and they said, what about science? What about science? So he said, so we used it exactly. And but the one kind of interesting thing, and this jumps way out of sequence, but I'm old and I forget stuff if I don't tell you. Anyway, so the Sherman Brothers do this song for us called "Making Memories." Well, they did several songs. They did "Magic Journeys" and they did "One Little Spark" and stuff like that. But anyway, we so people have gone through this ride. Now they've gone up to the Image Works and they've exercised their imagination, and now they got to wait for Magic Journeys to start, because Magic Journey starts on a regular basis. I know it's a 15-minute movie or something like that. And so they had to wait in a room by themselves, and we said, gee, if they got to do that, we should show them some pictures. So we did this little program called Making Memories. And the Sherman Brothers wrote the song for us, Making Memories. And so they sent me a little cassette of the song. And there was a line in there, something like, birthday vacations and celebrations can quickly disappear. I'm getting the words wrong, but it was something like that.
Yeah.
And the problem was Kodak at the time was involved in a big lawsuit about dye stability. And dye stability means your pictures fade over time, right? Dyes in film are organic and they fade. And so anyway, so people were suing Kodak over their pictures fading. So anyway, and along comes this song that says, birthday vacations can disappear and quickly disappear, or whatever. And so I say, okay, this is going to be a problem, right?
Right.
So I tell Richard, this is going to be a problem. And he goes, oh, we can fix it. We can fix that. And I tell him why it's a problem. It's not that I'm trying to mess with their words. It's a problem. And so he changes it to something like, birthday vacations that we can forget in a year, or something, or whatever, that we can forget. Yeah, we can forget in a year. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, yeah, that's good. That's good. And so he sends it back to me. And so I play it for a couple of people and they go, oh, no. If I show it to our legal people and they go, no, we can't approve that. That's that really references things that could disappear, and they go through this horse shit, and so anyway, I was doing a lot of speech writing at the time, and one of the people I wrote for is a guy named Dr. Herb Reese, who was our chief technology officer, and Herb was really a good guy. I mean, he was had a lot of common sense. And so I went, and of course I couldn't tell the lawyers, look, go away. So I took the tape to Herb Reese, and I said, Herb, I'd like you to listen to something. And I played the tape for him. So, oh, it's great. He said, what are you going to use that for? And I told him, and he said, oh, that's great. Oh, yeah, that really catches the fun of photography. And I said, so here's the problem, Herb. I said, the lawyers won't let me use this because of, the birthday celebrations we can forget in a year. Really? He says, no. He said, the lawyers are going to go away. I'll talk to them. He said, this has nothing to do with dye stability. He said, those lawyers, they're crazy. And I said, well, I know that. And he goes, yeah. He says, so don't worry about it. He said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of this. And so I said, okay. And he had the seniority as the company's chief technologist. He could tell them, go away. And so they went away.
That's great.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, you mentioned the selling Kodak, so much Kodak film there in the park. And I'm always interested in what the partner companies were able to get out of these participation deals. Like, obviously, Kodak got to be the official film of Walt Disney World and sponsored the guide maps and the photo spots. And, for kids like me who are at the park, like, I would never use any film other than Kodak, because Kodak to me was like the ultimate, because they were, at Journey into Imagination. But also the final scenes of the attraction there were heavily sort of film and imaging focused, I guess you would say. I think of those rooms with the screens with Figment and film. So there was a sort of film and imaging element there.
Yeah. Yeah, there was, and it was kind of a benefit and a curse, right? I mean, on the one hand, we were a film company and we could do wonderful things with film and so forth. But film, when you think of it, was somewhat of a limiting technology. I mean, once Kodak was afraid of digital because digital would cannibalize what was a really, it was Kodak's business. We had a license to print money, right? I mean, for a while, right? And film, and yet when digital came along, that was going to change everything. Now, you could do with film a lot of what you could do with digital, but it was tough, and you also had some limitations. I mean, when you think of the capturing the picture, taking the digital picture of people on the ride. I mean, first of all, it was supposed to happen on a speed ramp, right? The speed ramps didn't happen for technical reasons. We had nothing to do with that. That had nothing to do with film. But the idea was to capture an image of a person on a ride as they were kind of going down this ramp, where they'd have an expression of like, on their face. Right. And, and now they weren't going down the ramp. They were just kind of looking around and thinking, is this what I really look like? But capturing that image and then playing it back to them, right? I mean, today we can do that with a cell phone, right? At that time, it required a room full of floor-to-ceiling cabinets. There were like 12 gigantic cabinets in the room just to process the data and to play the thing back. And they had a technical expert standing by in case anything went wrong. And they had somebody monitoring the pictures to make sure, nobody was doing anything obscene. I mean, it was crazy, right? And so, I mean, yeah, we were an imaging company and we could do great things with imaging. And there are some wonderful images in every part of it, including Magic Journeys, the final, the Murray Lerner 3D thing. But it was limiting. I mean, that was the big draw in the 90s as Kodak became more comfortable, let's say, with digital imaging, and the world became more knowledgeable about what digital could really do,
Right.
and how, and there was a lot of thinking that, wow, digital could create a more immersive experience. It could take away some of the limitations that were in the ride. It really could expand the imagination. I mean, that's kind of, I think, what got us involved in thinking, yeah, maybe we could do more with this ride. And then, of course, everything went to hell in a handbasket. So anyway.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that when we, yes. But I've always thought it was amazing that, in the 80s as a kid, you see this digital image and you don't really think about it. It's a neat thing, but that ride was full of neat things and it's all sort of Disney magic. But as you grow up and realize the advanced technology for the time required for that, as you say, and I mean, that I'm sure was probably the first encounter most people ever had with a digital photograph. That was way ahead of the curve.
Yeah. I mean, there were some things that were ahead of the curve that you could appreciate now, taking a close view of them, that people just took for granted. I mean, the original scene, the first scene, the opening scene in the ride, the fact that was on a turntable with 5 cars kind of moving around sort of 40 seconds apart, right? Now, I mean, that had never been done. Anything that looked like it was still was actually moving. Anything that was actually looked like it was moving was actually still, because you were moving in synchronization with what was in, the dream vehicle and so forth. That looked like it was flying along with you. But that gave Tony and the team 3.5 minutes to tell you a story, to set the story that they couldn't do any other way. I mean, normally you're passing by something, right? And a ride vehicle is just continually moving, you're passing by. I mean, that was really unique. I mean, that let you, it introduced you to Dreamfinder, it introduced you to Figment, it gave you, the concept. It was a unique blend of sort of singing and talking, and with the Sherman Brothers music woven in there. In 3.5 minutes, that really kind of prepared you for going into this storeroom of imagination and seeing how the recombining and so forth worked. That was unique, in terms of, people didn't think about it. Capturing the picture, as you say, on a moving ride vehicle and then playing it back to you was unique. Even the 3D, the technology used for a 3D movie, we always knew from the beginning this was going to be a 3-act experience. Act 1 was going to be Dreamfinder and Figment, capturing and so forth, storing the information and then recombining it and so forth. Act 2 was going to be when you could use your own imagination to do things up in the ImageWorks. And then Act 3 was going to be watching a young boy sort of, explore his own imagination back in the real world. Mm-hmm. And so they were going to kind of take you from a fantasy world back into a real world. We always knew Act 3 was going to be a movie. We didn't know what kind of movie it was going to be, right? And so we went through a bunch of proposals, and where they showed us some CG stuff over at the studio, and it was like, yeah, that's all right. And then the original proposal was IMAX. And, I kept saying that, look, Kodak is film. We can't do something everybody else is doing. Ours has got to be unique. So at that time, 3D was unique. Today, you could do it. But I mean, 3D, of course, as you know, had a kind of resurgence in the 1950s when it was used for shock value, where people could, throw swords at you and, do kind of crazy things.
Right.
But I don't think it had ever been used to really kind of tell such an imaginative story. So once we decided, that was going to happen, of course, Murray Lerner, was the catalyst for that, where Randy Bright and Tony had seen a thing he made, a movie he made called Sea Dreams, using a process called Space Vision, where he printed the images over, and they were called an over and under printing, where you print with the left eye and then you print the right eye below it and the left eye, and then you take a prism and you separate it out and you make it in 3D. And so we went down to Florida to see that. And John Simons, who was the head of physics, went with us, the head of our physics group. He got involved in this thing. He went down, and I still remember him and Murray Lerner sitting at a table outside this theater with napkins and a pen, and John Simons explaining to Murray how his space vision was not going to work, and how it was going to have to be shot with 2 cameras, each using 65 millimeter film, and it was going to have to be printed back on dual strand 70 millimeter. That had never been done, ever. And so that, so you go and you look at this movie and you say, oh, that's really cool. Well, that had never been done, so,
Right.
So there's a couple of these never have been done things. And if you talk to Tony, he could probably tell you some more, but there's a few.
I mean, that was so impressive to me about Magic Journeys, because I think at the time you say 3D film and people think of the old sort of anaglyphic, like red and blue glasses and that sort of thing. But I mean, this was, as you say, this was like 70 millimeter stereo film with computer effects, which were brand new pretty much at the time. And the effect was incredible. It really was.
Yeah. The other, I'll tell you one other little story I'm not sure I've told, but so there's one other aspect, so Kodak, as you said, was run by engineers. And so they wanted to give Disney all the engineering help that you guys needed, not that you needed any of it. Mm-hmm. But one of the things Kay Whitmore did is he said, look, if Disney wants any help from any of our guys down in our research labs, bring them in. So we brought them in, and they met with, there were 3 guys who 2 of them ultimately got pretty involved. One of them was tangentially involved. The guy who got involved a lot was John Simons. We talked about John Simons working out some calculations with Murray Lerner. There was another guy by the name of Steve Hines, and then there was a guy by the name of Lee Frank. Lee Frank was only tangentially involved. In fact, Lee just passed away in the past year or so. But Steve Hines, once he got involved working on, working on this Disney project, Steve, I don't think ever went back to doing his real Kodak work, whatever that was. I mean, he was so enthralled with working with this stuff. Well, anyway, once we decided we were going to do a 3D film, once the film was going to be 3D, Steve worked on some glasses. And Steve came up with these glasses that have never seen the light of day other than in one prototype. And what he did is he made the front of the glasses out of an eggshell carton, that pressed foam. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then for the sides, he used 2 pieces of string with balls on the end. Okay. And the advantage of them is they were incredibly light. I mean, they were so light, you couldn't feel anything on your face. And the fact that these balls were string that went over your ears, even if you wore glasses and your ears were set far back, that didn't make any difference. They didn't, nothing hugged your ears. It was so comfortable. You didn't know you had glasses on. I mean, they were so comfortable. And anyway, it turned out that we didn't use them. He showed them to Disney. Everybody loved them. The problem is, I think they were 25 cents a piece. And of course they couldn't be reusable because of Florida, people sweat and so forth. You couldn't clean them.
Right.
You couldn't reuse them in any way. And so you had to throw them out. And so, obviously that was kind of cost prohibitive. So anyway, we never used them, but boy, oh boy, were they great 3D glasses. They were really comfortable. Steve also did a couple of other things. When Kodak came up with you remember Kodak had an instant camera? Mm-hmm. Kodak had an instant camera. It was about the size of a small poodle. It was not a small camera, and because it was not a small camera, it was subject to shake. Right, you're holding something big in your hands. So Steve came up with a gyroscope that would go inside the camera, that would stabilize the camera. It added 8 cents to the cost of the camera, and Kodak turned them down. So Anyway, he didn't do that. But Steve did eventually leave Kodak, started a company. He may still have the company, I don't know, called Heinz Labs. It's in Los Angeles. I think it was on San Fernando Road for a while at least. But anyway, Steve designed the rig that was used, the 3D camera rig that would hold two 65 millimeter cameras for the 3D shooting for Magic Journeys.
Oh,
So
okay.
anyway, it was Steve's contribution.
It was a big accomplishment, and it got written up. I've got a lot of magazines, like film magazines at the time, all seem to have articles about this, about Magic Journeys and how it was put together, because it was such an advanced production and
it's pretty amazing.
such a trippy kind of movie. It
It
was
was.
wild.
Yeah, I mean, it was all, as Tony will tell you, what they wanted to do is they wanted to capture the feeling of Windmills of Your Mind, that song, Windmills of Your Mind.
Sure, yeah.
And they gave that directive to Murray. And of course, Murray did his own thing, and then they gave the same directive to the Sherman Brothers to capture, that same feeling in the song they wrote called Magic Journeys. So.
Right. Going back to the ride, there's one thing you mentioned that I had wanted to ask about, which was this sort of thrill element that didn't quite make it into the final ride. But I always found it interesting looking back at sort of memos and things. Someone at Kodak was very interested in having a thrill aspect to the attraction. So even at the beginning, when you guys were figuring out, which pavilion are we going to sponsor, somebody at Kodak we want to sponsor what is the most thrilling attraction you have? We want to sponsor that one, which is why I think they probably pitched you space for a while. So there was definitely an interest at Kodak about this sort of thrilling element.
Well, that may be true, but I don't know. The only thing I know about it is that Kay Whitmore really liked the idea of speed ramps. He liked the idea that we were going to have a ride that had the fastest element to it. I don't know that we ever promised or he ever expected anything to be a thrill ride. And he never raised objections when it was pretty obvious they weren't going to be able to do that. He never said, okay, then we're out, or, never raised holy hell about the thing. It just kind of went away. But that's all I know about the thrill aspect of things. I don't think we ever planned a thrill ride.
Right. They just wanted like you said, the speed ramp.
They wanted speed ramps. And unfortunately, technically they couldn't happen. And I think it was because of the complicated ride mechanism with the turntable, where the things had to either connect at the right time or the whole ride would stop. So it was a fairly complex ride. Maybe it didn't look that way, but I think it was fairly complex. So.
Well, I think so. With having to, especially in a system where you couldn't have, like nowadays, you could have a computer in every car and it would, you could do that, but it was all having to be controlled remotely and get in and out of that turntable on time and keep everything spaced out right. And I'm sure it wasn't easy at all.
Yeah.
Talk a little about the development of the ride, how it sort of changed during development. I know at one point there were it had two turntables.
Yeah.
To it. How did that develop?
Well, I think that the two turntable, the idea was to pick people up where they were and to drop them off at the ImageWorks, rather than to drop them off and then say, oh no, by the way, you can climb up these stairs and go to the ImageWorks. The idea was to make it more seamless in any event. So, but I think that was kind of one of the results of budget cuts. So don't forget that at that time, we paid $10 million, okay? Disney, because that's what Disney asked for. They said they thought it would cost them $10 million to design, develop, build, staff, maintain, and keep everything operational for the first 10 years, okay? In fact, the last we heard, they were already above 14 million just designing and building the thing. Okay, so they were clearly losing money. And Disney at that time was not in a position to lose major bucks. So they were looking around for what they could cut. And that was one of the things that got cut, fortunately. But I think we're fortunate that a lot of things didn't get cut. I mean, if you look in some of the original paintings or drawings or whatever you have, you'll probably see more rock work that turned into stucco and that kind of stuff. But I know Disney wanted to replace some glass with stucco, and fortunately, what Tony would do is when he knew they wanted to do that, he'd let us know. And so the next time Kodak managers and whatever would get together with Disney, and Disney would bring this up, they would just say no. You got to have this. And so anyway, so we got, I think we got a great value for our money, as it were, But the ride it just seemed to happen. I mean, I can't, I can't say, oh, okay, so they built room 1 and then they built room 2 and they built room 3. I mean, it seemed to flow. But I remember when we went into the Imaginarium, or wherever the storage area is. So you get off the ride, now you go into the first storage area. There's this big pot, and there's like a waterfall in the pot, and rainbows coming into the pot, and the pot has a big handle on it. Mm-hmm. And the reason for the handle was because the plastic cracked for the waterfall, cracked, and Disney didn't have time to replace it, or couldn't replace it or something. And so what they did is they built a handle and covered the crack in the plastic with a handle. Right. So it flows, behind the handle. So anyway, I mean, that kind of stuff. It was just, I remember Tony talking about the fact that, what they had to do is they had to simplify things in order to make it universal. I mean, because if you go, so you start out in kind of the art room, and then you go into the kind of the literature room, and you have about 10 gazillion books to pick from. How do you convey literature? Well, you again sort of go for the cliche. It was a dark and stormy night, and then how do you imagine that? Well, you imagine Dreamfinder at a volcano, and so it was a question of sort of combining cliches with, imaginative sort of elements, as it were. And then you go into, entertainment. So the idea was to just take you through a few, how do you combine sort of elements, and then, let you kind of play with your own imagination. So,
right.
Anyway, but I mean, the thing that it kind of sticks in my mind, another thing that sticks in my mind is, the ride was, I think, about 12 minutes long, and didn't seem too long. I mean, it seemed maybe too short, if anything. And people tell me that today's ride is 6 minutes long, and it's way too long. But I mean, again, it's like anything in life. It's not how long is it; it's how long does it seem like it is, right? And,
right. Well, and then I think that's because the ride presented you with something. Every time you went around a corner was something new. And you mentioned some of these scenes, like that art scene with the paper animals was so beautiful. And then the literature, then the spooky stories, which as a little kid kind of freaked me out, I will admit. And the entertainment with the dancing lasers. And there was always something new to see, no matter where you turned.
Yeah. And the lasers were probably, pretty new stuff for, today, see, you do it with drones, right? You have drones flying all over the place in there. But that was new stuff. Again, it was taking the cliche, the song and dance. Figment is a song and dance man, but then accompanied with lasers, so it kind of plussed it, I think, is what Disney said. They plus things.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I wanted to ask about, you mentioned how originally the ride was supposed to unload upstairs, which I think would have been great. Yeah. But also in some of the early, the first sort of press releases when Kodak signed the deal to officially sponsor the pavilion, there was supposed to be an observation platform up there too.
Yeah, wasn't there? Yeah. The and it's funny because Neil and Greg and I loved that idea. Disney called it Castle in the Sky, right? And so the idea was, we are going to take you up above this place. We're going to take you higher than you can go in any other pavilion at EPCOT, and you're going to be able to kind of look out over the land, as it were. And we thought, wow, what a great idea, right? Brought it back to Kodak, and Walt Fallon, again, the guy who said, why can't we do that? Looked at that and he said, I don't want to do that. He said, I don't want anybody up there looking at rooftops. Nah, not from our place. And that was it. I mean, now I was too young a guy to say, wait a minute, Walt, this is a great idea. Let's, because you didn't say that to Walt. You said, yes, sir.
Right.
If Walt had been gone and Colby was there or Kay were there, they were very different people. I could have talked to Colby about it.
Yeah. Nowadays, everybody would love it. They could take selfies up there.
And, for sure.
Great.
For sure. It was a great idea.
So, you're developing this attraction. You got this wonderful opening turntable, which, like you said, is just a genius way to introduce characters in a short amount of time. But you've got these characters. At some point, you had to cast voices for Dreamfinder and Figment. So how did that happen?
Well, yeah. So Dreamfinder was, Tony will tell you, easy. In fact, he said, Chuck McCann was their choice. He came in, he did it, and they said, yep, he's Dreamfinder, right? Interesting. And probably nobody but me knows this story or cares about this story, but at some point before then, I'm going to say in the early 1970s, Kodak actually hired Chuck McCann as part of a marketing film. He played Oliver Hardy in a Laurel and Hardy kind of bit. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you what product it was for, but I still remember shooting it on some closed expressways in Rochester where he was driving a go-kart. And so Chuck McCann has that connection with Kodak. Now, I'm sure it made no difference whatsoever, but in any event, Chuck McCann got cast. Figment was the problem, as you know, because Figment, Dreamfinder was a Victorian gentleman. You know how old he was, you know what sex he was, you know kind of what he looked like. What is a figment? Right. Is it male? Is it female? Is it young? Is it old? Is it, it's not black or white, it's purple, right? And so what does a purple dragon sound like when he talks? And Disney went through a tremendous number of auditions, casting all kinds of older people, younger people, men, women, people doing different voices. And Tony said, what they would do is when they would bring somebody in for a recording, they would tape up a picture of Figment next to the booth. And as they were listening to the recording, Tony and the others who were doing this were listening to the recording, they were asking themselves, does this voice look like this character? Which I think was a really kind of an interesting way of doing that. Mm-hmm. And couldn't find any. And he said the hardest part was, telling some of these well-known actors and actresses, and he never gave me any names, and I never asked him for any names, but he said telling some of these well-known actors and actresses who were kind of past their prime and who really needed the work, telling them, no, that's not it. And, and we're not going to be able to get to it. Yeah. So in any event, so he said they got desperate where they were putting ads in, saying, look, if you get us a voice for Figment, we'll give you a free dinner at Club 33 or, whatever. And they were offering rewards, right?
Yeah.
So it was, according to Tony, at least, it was Randy Bright who suggested, have you ever considered a little person? Mm. And Tony said, that was it. He said, the first person, he said, so we put out a call for, little people. He said, and Billy Barty was the first person who responded.
Wow.
I thought Billy Barty was in Wizard of Oz, but when I checked the credits, he was not. But of course, he was in a lot of other things. But my favorite, Tony said when he came in and did it, we just knew he was Figment. I mean, we just, he was that. But my favorite Billy Barty story is when he was in the booth doing, his Figment stuff. He was also horsing around, of course, because And so he apparently told the story of his wife locking him out of the house.
Uh-huh.
And maybe you've heard the story. And he
Yeah.
said, and in his perfect, in the perfect Figment voice, he said, "Open the damn door! I'm freezing my ass off out here." Right. And so, anyway, of course, they had that recorded. And so Tony said the next time they had a review with Marty, when they were doing Dreamfinder, saying, "Voila, we have a Figment," and up open, and you hear from inside the bag, "Open the damn door! I'm freezing my ass off out here." Tony said, Marty did not think that was funny at all. He thought we were going to use it. He said we never would have used it. He just thought it was fun. So anyway,
That's
Billy
hilarious.
Barty's story.
That's great. Well, you mentioned the Sherman Brothers and the trio of songs that they created for this pavilion, which are all great. And I always, it was only with the internet and things coming out on the internet, I had never realized that Bob Moline had written a song for Imagination before the Sherman Brothers.
Sure.
That's very catchy. It's not the Sherman Brothers, but it's very catchy. Right. So what do you know about how they came to be involved and just your thoughts about what they came up with for the show?
Yeah. So what happened is Bob Moline had written the song called "Let's All Take a Journey into Imagination." Mm-hmm. And Tony said it was good, but it was not great. And so he is actually the one who went to Marty and said, "Why don't we try the Sherman Brothers?" And Marty said, "Well, they haven't really been involved with anything that's been, that great lately." And Tony said, "But they shouldn't take the blame for a project that's not that great." He said, "I think they would understand this. I think they would be the right people to do this." So anyway, Marty called them. They came in, and they always gave credit to Marty for something that was actually Tony's idea, but that was okay. So they came in and they wrote One Little Spark. So Tony, meanwhile, instead of telling us he hired the Sherman Brothers or whatever, so Greg DeNovis and I come out to California for one of our trips, and Tony tells us his story, because Tony was all, I just used to love to hang around with Tony, listen to his stories. So he tells us his story, and he tells us about the Sherman Brothers, and they used to go into Walt's office and on Friday afternoon, and and then they would, Walt would say, "Play it, boys," and they'd play Tuppence a Bag, and that's how they would pitch. They'd pitch Walt on their latest ideas and this old piano and whatnot. And so he kind of, sets up this whole thing. And so we got to lunch that day. And after lunch, he brings us back to this conference room. And we go into this conference room and we sit down, and in come these two guys who look like they took the trolley directly from vaudeville, and they come in and they sit down, and Richard sits behind the piano and Bob taps his foot, and so they got a two-piece orchestra going here, and they sing this One Little Spark, and it was just great. I mean, it was just it was like, yeah, and enabled enabled the Imagineers then to sort of combine this talking and singing kind of thing, where it just felt very natural. It wasn't a song that was playing in the background while Dreamfinder was trying to tell you something, or I mean, it was just they sort of got it. They understood exactly how that needed to work. So they did that, and then of course they did the Magic Journeys. And then when it came time to do this little, what are we going to do with these people who have come on down from the ImageWorks, and now they're waiting for, to get into Magic Journeys, and they got to wait for 10 minutes or whatever. How are we going to entertain them? And I said, well, why don't we do a little slideshow? And so Disney said, rightly so, well, let's ask the Sherman Brothers to do a song. So anyway, so I got to work directly with them then, and that was fun. Because what I said is, so the song has to be about photography, because we're going to do a little photography show. And so I talked to him a little bit about my feeling of photography and what photography lets you do, and so forth. And so Richard, who I mean, he just kind of gets things. He said, yeah, I get it. He said, taking pictures is making memories. And so it's like, yeah, it is. And so I'm not sure if they wrote the song on the way back to their office but in any event, they sent this wonderful sort of ragtime feeling vaudeville song that we took and we made a big multi-image presentation. At that time, I used to do those for Kodak, and this was a 15 projector show with all kinds of slides and special masking and stuff. And so anyway, we told Marty. Marty was obviously a key person. You had to get the permission from. We said, "Here's what we want to do." Marty did not want us to do it because he said those shows are unreliable. And we said, well, we think we can make them reliable. The technology is there, computer controlled technology is there to make them reliable. He said, all right. He said, I'll tell you what, you can do it. He said, you put it in. He said, the first time it fails, we'll have you fix it. The second time it fails, you're taking it out. And so we said, okay. So we put it in. And actually, I went down with two other guys to install the thing and put it in, and they never asked us to take it out. We actually, Tom Davis, who was our cameraman on the thing, he did we called it rephotography, which was, making them into slides, all these old pictures, because we had a lot of old pictures and stuff. I'm sure you've seen the show.
Sure.
He made, I think, 10 sets of those, and we would replace the sets every, 6 months or something like that for a number of years. And then finally, they replaced it with, some other thing. But anyway, we never had to take it out. And so that was, and we had a couple of pictures of the kids. I mean, one of the things that I like about this whole, the experience was a memorable part of my Kodak career, right? It was a highlight of my Kodak career, but because there was a piece of me there, which was the little show I had done. There was a piece of our kids, of Jennifer and Tim there, because it was their fear of the dark, or that eventually led to the creation of Figment. Mm-hmm. There was a piece of Tim left there because it was his curiosity about where is that jet going that led to the name. And the first Figment doll that I brought back, in fact, I've got can you see this?
Oh, yeah, there he is.
They had Kodak thing on. We brought back for, quote, baby Gibbons, because that's before we had met Emily, who was our third daughter, born in 79, in September 79. So there's a piece of all the kids there, and some couple pictures were in the Making Memory show. So anyway, piece of my family there. My wife is in the pictures. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, one element of the pavilion we've talked about the ride and the movie, but there was this creative playground called the Image Works. What are some of your memories about that part of the project?
That was where Kay Whitmore, our president, wanted to open the research labs to any help that Disney wanted. Mm-hmm. And so, as they say, Steve Hines got very involved in proposing a number of things that didn't happen, because one of the reasons was they were expensive, but another reason is that Disney insisted on playtesting everything. So, it couldn't work once and it couldn't work twice. It had to keep working, and couldn't break. So, there was some technology. There were some things there. Dreamport School of Drama, for example, there was like, oh my gosh, look at this. Isn't this fun? Because I remember we took our kids down to EPCOT, and they had a ball in there. They were, I don't know, in some Western scene or something. Mm-hmm. And it was blue screen. Basic blue screen, right? And then the electronic Philharmonic, where you got to conduct the orchestra just by raising your hands and stuff. Today we look back at this stuff and you go, how simple could it be? Come on, But at that time, it was just a lot of fun, and it was kind of a nice bridge. It was a nice second act. It was a nice way to kind of say, okay, here, you've watched Dreamport or Figment exercise their imagination. Now go exercise yours, in kind of a low key, sort of fun filled, kick back, do it at your own tempo way. And so, it was a nice bridge, I thought.
Well, and I think, obviously you're right I think it's just the perfect combo of Kodak's technology and that sort of Disney showmanship that put on, like you say, all of that could be done easily today with stuff you could order off of Amazon, probably the electronic bits that you need to make any of those things. But that sort of Disney style, that like the electronic Philharmonic, which I loved as a kid because you could really ham it up and make it do whatever. Just really stylish and fun. And I mean, there's nothing more simple in the world than those pin screens, but they were great. They were so much fun.
Yeah, they were. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is when you think back to the ride, the Image Works and the movie, there was such a sense of fun and joy to the whole thing. It was so uplifting. It was just, it kind of left you feeling like you have an imagination that you can explore. It was kind of an empowering sort of thing. It wasn't just go in and watch something happen and then leave. It was, no, it kind of changed you in a little way. And that was, the other rides is kind of, and not to denigrate any of the other rides, but, you went through a transportation pavilion and you kind of, okay, I came out of that, and I had a transportation experience. But in imagination, you kind of felt like you had a personal experience. You felt like my experience was a little different from your experience, which is a little different from the kids' experience, which is, it was just, felt more personal, felt more fun, felt more uplifting, felt like a greater sense of joy. You just felt better coming out of it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It was an experience. And the fun thing about all this technology was you'd see it there, then, I don't know, 5 or 10 years later, you might see it in the real world, but it would be like, oh, I saw that for the first time at Journey into Imagination. That's where I saw it. I think of the Magic Palette where you could paint, the interactive screens and stuff. You couldn't do that anywhere else. You could only do that there. And of course, now you can do it on your phone, but the first place it happened was there.
Yeah, I think the other thing is when Colby Chandler he became our CEO, when he went down to do our soft opening in December of 1982, he said that he said imagination is a bit like a camera, right? It's easy enough for a child to use. And yet it enables people to do things that they couldn't do any other way. He said, a camera and imagination are not important for what they are, but for what they enable you to do. And I think this became sort of a whole kind of enabling pavilion, and so when I think back, I don't really think of the technology. I kind of think of the fun and the experience. I think that's what Disney does so very well is they hide the technology behind the experience. So you remember the experience, and forget about the technology. It's not like, wow, it took, 7,000 bits of data to crunch, now we look at it and we go, oh my God, the amount of technology behind it. But let's talk to a million people who've gone through that pavilion. They don't remember the technology. They remember the fun, the experience, the characters, the joy. That's what they remember.
Well, and it's like you say, talking about Tony, it's that emotional connection, that emotional bridge. Yeah. So you go down, you were down there for the opening, right? When you guys had been under the gun to get things open, you finally get it open. What was that like?
Well, first of all, I want to show you something because I still have it. Although this is a photograph of it. This is my original ticket for the soft opening.
Nice.
It was a 3-day ticket. the way they could tell you use the day is they stamped it. They know, like the
Mm-hmm.
old library books. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Mine is stamped for December 4th, 1982, or 1982, and December 5th, 1982. So that would have meant that our soft opening was on the 5th, because I'm sure it was down there the 4th to, kind of check and make sure before Colby showed up that everything was, going to work.
Right.
It was a very, very windy day, is what I remember. I still have some pictures with Dreamfinder and Figment. I'm trying to remember what his name is. Ron, somebody who.
Ron Schneider.
I think Ron Schneider. I think who dressed as Dreamfinder,
Mm-hmm.
and anyway, but yeah, it was fun. I mean, the story I remember is, and this is before Figment obviously became well known. And Tony told me the story. He said he was standing in a Disney gift shop, listening to a mother saying to her young daughter, "All right, you're going to have to make a decision. Do you want the Mickey Mouse doll, or do you want the flying purple kangaroo?" Anyway, so from the very beginning, it was a choice between Mickey and the flying purple kangaroo.
Purple kangaroo, but they figured it out. Eventually, they figured it out.
They did.
Well, so once you get this thing finished and everything's up and running, how did you feel about it? How did Kodak feel about it once it was done?
I think we were thrilled. I think we, it was, it was kind of some place we could host customers in a really, memorable way.
Mm-hmm.
We had the Kodak Lounge, which, as you know, was kind of built up over in the back there. Mm-hmm. And Frank O'Connor was our first a manager of that. And so you could send people down, and Frank could backdoor you into, the ride, or backdoor you into the movie. And, so that was it was a great place to host customers. We were a company that was big enough to be able to do something like that. It kind of put us with, some top tier companies, Kraft, and United Technologies, and Exxon, or whoever was sponsor of that,
Mm-hmm.
General Motors. And so, it gave us kind of bragging rights. So it was kind of nice. And, the thing is that of the other sponsorships that we had, the Olympics were, every 4 years, eventually every 2 years with the Winter Olympics. But, they came and they went. America's Junior Miss came and it went. The basketball award came and it went. EPCOT was there all the time, so we could, it was the company was very pleased with it. And I was, as proud as I said, I felt that there were pieces of me left behind. It was a question, it was an opportunity to, spend part of my time working with geniuses, as opposed to spending part of my time in the office writing reports and stuff like that. So it was,
Right.
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Well, it was obviously such a huge hit. I love looking at old photos.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was always just a massive line to get into the pavilion, and people clearly just loved this attraction. It was really the big sort of hit of the park. But one thing that surprises me looking back is how quickly things began to change in the park. Of course, Eisner came in, there was new management, and 4 years after Imagination opened, Magic Journeys was replaced with Captain EO. What can you tell me about that?
Well, all right. So what happened is I want to tell you one other story, though, just because.
No, please.
It has nothing to do with the question, but I'll get back to your question.
Quite all right.
Because this story is about somebody who I just love. Her name is Laurel. Do you know Tony's assistant, Laurel?
No, I don't.
Laurel Wright. Anyway, so in the beginning, when Tony and I first started working together, Laurel is Tony's long-term assistant. So anyway, which is, I guess, what we used to call them secretaries, but I think it's illegal in some states to call them secretaries. Anyway, but she was his assistant. So anyway, so Tony and I first started working together, and I call Tony, and of course I get Laurel on the phone, whatever, and say, I'd like to talk to Tony. Tony isn't here, blah, 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 blah. He'll call you back. Tony never calls me back. Okay. So I think Tony must be upset with me. I must have done something to upset Tony. I don't know why he won't call me back. I thought we were. So anyway, I finally asked Tony. I said, "So what? Are you upset? I mean, what's going on?" And he said, "Why? Why would you ask that?" And I said, "Well, because I call you and I don't hear back from you." And he goes, "Oh, all right." He says, "Yeah." He said, "Well, he said, Laurel is trying to protect me." He said, "So she's sorting my calls and deciding who I really need to talk to." And he said, "So I'll talk to her." And I said, "No, don't talk to her. I'll take care of this." And so he said, "All right." So what I did is obviously at Kodak, I had access to cameras and films and stuff like that. So I put together a package of, our latest camera and a whole bunch of film and stuff like that. I send it off to Laurel with a note that, I know how important you are to the relationship Tony and I have, and so I just wanted you to have this, as a member of the Kodak team. Let me tell you, from that day forward, wherever Tony was, I could get him immediately, and Laurel and I became each other's best friend. When Tony had his retirement, he had a couple of retirement parties, but he had one retirement party where he decided who was coming.
Yeah.
If he wanted you there, you were there. And so Pete Baxter was there and Richard Sherman was there. And, so anyway, I was there because Laurel called me and she said, "I'll take care of you." And so anyway, my Laurel story.
That's
great lady, great lady. I love her. So anyway, just so you know that. Anyway, so now we'll answer your question. So anyway, so Michael Eisner comes in and he decides he goes down to this is what I know through Tony and through a number of other people. Obviously, I don't tour around with Michael Eisner, but Michael goes down to EPCOT, looks around, and he goes, "There's not enough for young teenager kind of kids to do here. We got to make this. We got to make this younger. We got to put something in here for that." So he gets the opportunity to Francis Ford Coppola or somebody brings him this idea for Captain EO, a 3D movie starring Michael Jackson. Well, Michael Eisner loves stars, as I think you know, right? I mean, he's changed a lot of the pavilions to sort of star-based pavilions. So anyway, so Michael comes to Kodak and he says, "Look, I want to do this 3D movie, and I don't want to build another 3D theater. So I'd like to use your 3D theater. So we'd like to replace Magic Journeys with Captain EO." And not only that, but because Michael has the nerve to say almost anything he wants to, Michael says, "And by the way, I'd like you, Kodak, to pay for the movie."
Sure.
And it's $1 million. Okay. And so Kodak says, "You can use our theater, but we're not paying you $1 million. Okay. We're not going to pay for the movie. We like Magic Journeys just fine. What we should have said is, 'Go away, Michael,' but we didn't." Okay. So anyway, we said, okay. So he said, so Michael comes back and goes, "Okay. So here's the thing. Why don't you, Kodak, figure out what you want that we have that would be worth $1 million to you? You give us $1 million and we'll use it to buy the movie." So that's why for a while there you saw Disney characters appearing on Kodak cameras and film boxes and so forth, because we paid $1 million to license some characters. Okay.
Oh.
And Michael used the money to buy the movie, to pay for the movie. Now, what we should have seen, and I'm obviously not smart enough to see this except in my rearview mirror, and then it's really clear, is this was the beginning of the end. Okay. This took a 3-act play and changed the 3rd act to make it irrelevant. Right. So suddenly we had a story that didn't make nearly as much sense as it made originally. Okay. And that was the beginning of the end. I mean, things went downhill from there. I think. Now, that's the personal opinion. Some people will say, oh, but it was a great movie and it was a lot of fun and it was the original music video and it was Michael Jackson was hot and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but not there, okay? Because that tore the ride apart. I think it was the first step.
Yeah, understood. And well, as you've alluded to, there were more changes coming. Obviously, the big changes to the ride in the late 90s. What do you know about how and why did that happen?
Well, so what happened was as Kodak became more comfortable with digital, and as digital clearly had the capability of creating a more immersive experience, Disney came to Kodak and said, how about if we reimagine this ride for the future, right? For what's coming along, to make it more current. Now, fundamentally, I think that's a good idea, but the way it was done is what was the bad idea. So what happened is they put together a team of Imagineers, and at Kodak, they asked me to be on the team again. By this time, I had moved in 1994. Kodak moved us to Hollywood, where I ran communications for the movie industry for Kodak. Okay, so that was my new job starting in 1994. Now, by the time Disney came to Kodak in the late 90s, Kodak management had changed entirely. Okay, once upon a time, Kay Whitmore told Disney management, at that time it was Card Walker and Ron Miller and whatever before Michael, Kay Whitmore told them, Bob Gibbons speaks for me when he talks to you. Okay, so obviously I had the support of Kodak management, right? By the late 90s, Kodak management had changed entirely. Kay was gone, Colby was gone, they had new managers in. They were in Rochester, I was in Hollywood, I had no daily connection with them. I was not doing any speech writing for the managers, for senior management anymore. So, I was kind of in a very different job, but my connection was I had worked on the original, so why not get Bob involved? So Bob gets involved with two other guys, a guy by the name of Ron Dixon and a guy by the name of Dave Steck from Kodak, and then Disney Imagineers. So I, of course, asked the logical question, well, if I'm involved, why isn't Tony involved? Mm-hmm. Marty tells me that because we want to give young Imagineers a chance to do this, okay? So, okay, we'll try. So in any event, in come the young Imagineers, and stuff isn't making any sense to me because it sounds like they don't understand what's here or what they've got. It's funny because Tony and I have talked about this a lot, and Tony said, "Look, if I had been on the team, we would have gone down there. You and I would have gone down there, and we would have walked the ride, and we would have ridden the ride, and we would have stopped along the way and said, what's working here? What's not working? How could digital enhance what's working? How could digital replace what's not working? What do we need to do to improve what we already have?" Because the structure was fine. The story was great. The emotions were universal. The things were beautiful. There was so much that was right. It wasn't a case of tearing things out. It was a case of doing more with what was right and enhancing that, right? And that's what Tony would have done, and Tony will tell you that because he and I have talked about that. But anyway, instead, they started tearing things out. And as I told you, that was kind of the era of let's get a star involved. And so Eric Idle was going to be the star. Now, Eric Idle made no sense. Okay. And here's why it made no sense. If you think of why did Dreamfinder and Figment work, it's because they played off each other, right? You had the rational and the childish. You had, like the great comedy teams. You had George Burns was a straight man and Gracie Allen was saying nutty things, and Desi Arnaz and Lucy Ball. You had two people who offered two different perspectives who were playing off each other. Dreamfinder and Figment were playing off each other. Mm-hmm. Now you had Eric Idle, who was a nutcase, and you had Figment, who was a childish nutcase. You had two comedians working together. that's not going to work. You don't need that. Okay. There's no yin and yang here. Right.
Right.
And but consequently, so in comes Eric Idle. Now we're building a story for Eric Idle. And, it was like amateur night at Imagineering. I mean, it was, they were throwing out story ideas they were throwing out miscellaneous ideas. It was like throwing them into a blender and a mix, and pouring the stuff out. And so I would ask, okay, so how does this relate to a story? Because the thing I learned from Tony is you got to tell a story. You got to tell a story. What's the story? And so there was no story. They would look at me like I was from Rochester. It's like, story. This is going to be fun. This is great. This is a great gag. We got to go for gags. So finally, it got to the point where I said, I don't know what's going on here. I mean, I talked to Tony, and I said, what do I do? I mean, what do I do? And he said, well, I think what you should do is you should write a letter to me about what your experience is here, and I'll get it to the right people. So I said, okay. So I kind of wrote the letter and gave it to Tony. And the next thing I heard from we had a new director of marketing in Rochester who was kind of in charge of all sponsorships and stuff like that. And he told me that Disney found my involvement disruptive, is what was the word he used. And so he was taking me off the team.
Oh.
And so that was it. So he took me off the team, and the team proceeded to tear everything apart. They took when they had the grand reopening or whatever it was of the ride. I went to Florida for that. They brought me to Florida for that, and I ended up riding in the same car as Marty Sklar. And so it was Marty and his wife and my wife and myself in the car. We rode through the ride. I got off the ride. I looked at Marty and I just shook my head, and I walked away. And that's the last time I've been on that ride. I mean, they sent me a poster of, Kodak and Disney reimagines Imagineering. I put the poster back in the case and threw it in the garbage. I mean, I don't want it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't think it's controversial to say that was a controversial attraction, and there was quite a bit of blowback. Do you know, was there any fallout after that based on the reaction to that you're aware of?
If there was, and it happened at Kodak, I don't know, because I was, again, out in Hollywood, and I was working in the movie industry. At that point in time, I'd been taken off the team and nothing more to do, with it. And so I didn't have to defend anything or, people knew I disagreed with what was going on. And, I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, I can't imagine, obviously Kodak is not involved with Disney anymore. I can't imagine they were thrilled with the results the way they were thrilled with the original results. Because, I mean, when we had the most popular ride at Disney, when people were just standing in line forever and talking in glowing terms, when everybody was just so proud of the Journey into Imagination, when it was appearing on our annual report, the cover of our annual report, where it was featured in the Colorama and the Kodak sponsored in Times Square, I mean, it was everywhere. The new ride was nowhere.
Right. Well, Bob, you've had an amazing career, even outside of this period that we've talked about. You just had an incredible career. I just wondered, when looking back about this Imagination project in particular, how you feel about it. It's become such a beloved experience. This ride, the ride that you worked on with Tony, has been gone, which is hard for me to believe it's been gone for as long as it has been, but it's been decades now. But it's still such a beloved experience. Dreamfinder and Figment are such beloved characters to this day. You put Figment on a popcorn bucket and it'll have a 5-hour wait to get a popcorn bucket of Figment. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's a highlight. It's obviously a highlight, maybe the highlight of my 40-year Kodak career, certainly. It was, it's thrilling to be around the genius. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. It's just, when you can work with somebody, and in fact call somebody a friend who you admire so much, and that being Tony Baxter, of course, that's pretty special. I mean, you meet, as you go through life, you meet a lot of people and you have a lot of experiences who help you get what you've got. But you only meet a very few who help you become who you are.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think for me, Tony and the Disney experience was one of those. I think it kind of, I don't know, kind of sharpened my imagination. I don't know if that's the right word. I mean, I went on to write a movie and so forth. And so, I mean, it helped me probably in ways that I don't even, consciously think about. But, just the way Tony thinks about things, the emotional connections, I mean, that kind of rubs off on you when you work with somebody like that, and to think that, gee, he's somebody, he lives an hour and a half from me. I can call him. I can go up there. I mean, I have this little Figment doll I just showed you. This Figment doll sits on my dresser and has been sitting on my dresser in our bedroom, for the past 44 years. And Tony has a little shrine to Figment too in the little guest bedroom where I stay when I go up this place, right? And so, I mean, it's just, it's sometimes there's things that are kind of tough to put into words, but it was, and the thing is that I guess because I was from Rochester, I wasn't as much of a Disney fanatic as I would have been had I grown up in Orange County or had I grown up, out in California. To me, meeting Blaine Gibson and meeting John Hench and meeting those guys, I was just meeting people.
Right.
I mean, now somebody else would go, oh my God, I was meeting legends. Well, yeah, looking back, I met legends, who I just thought were kind of interesting guys, very talented people. And, I mean, I'd been to Disneyland exactly once before I started working with Disney back in 1972 when I was in the Army, and, flew out to visit a friend in California, and he took my wife and Jeannie and I to Disneyland. And it cost $2 to get in, and we had to buy a book of ride tickets. And, I mean, and that was my total Disney experience till I started working. And to think, a kid from Rochester, a kid who grew up in the old 10th Ward, who, never thought he would get much further than, west than Buffalo, was able to work with Disney. It's pretty amazing looking back. Wow.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I mean, these characters that endure, I mean, Figment still, we've got golden books with Figment in them. And I mean,
I've got them comic books with Figment
comic
in them.
Books. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Figment. I wish Disney recognized what they have in Figment. I don't know if they do. I mean, I know they sell a lot of plush characters and so forth, but I mean, I just think Figment is such an interesting character who could be developed in I think interesting ways,
Well, in representing what he represents, he could hop to all sorts of different worlds. He can do science, he can do art, he can do anything. He's imagination. Yeah. He could teach kids a lot. I think Walt Disney said it's okay to teach people something as long as they don't know you're doing it, and I think Figment could do that. Yeah, absolutely agree. Well, Bob, I can't thank you enough for your time. This is the second I had talked to, we've spoken before, and the second I talked to you, I said, I know our listeners have to hear from you because you're a great storyteller, and I really appreciate you taking the time and talking to us.
Oh no, you're most welcome. If there's anything else you want to talk about, I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Well, that wraps up my chat with Bob Gibbons. Jeff, what a guy he is.
I want to just sit down with Bob Gibbons and get his take on all kinds of things. I mean, his Disney takes were interesting, but I'd love to talk Kodak more Kodak. I'd love to hear more about Hollywood in the 80s and 90s. I mean, there's all kinds of little roads, pathways you could go. And he's just quite the conversation partner.
He is great and just great memories, very free with sharing them. And, I especially owe him extra thanks because, he and I talked a few years ago. He told me all these stories and I was like, gosh, we got to get him on the podcast. But I hate, you hate having to ask somebody to redo an interview, hey, tell me those stories again. But sure enough, he did. And, even more and better info. So massive thanks to him. He was a delight to talk to. And you can really see how much he loved Imagination. He loved working with Tony and all the team that worked on, the great team that worked on that ride and that pavilion. And it was just a real pleasure. It's always great when you come across someone who you may not have heard their name before, but then they turn out to be just a delightful person and a great source of info.
Well, it just shows you too how many people were fundamentally collaborative on all these things that we know and love. I mean, he was not even a part of the Disney company, and clearly his contributions made a big difference to the final product. And, anytime I hear more about Imagination, it just breaks my heart a little bit, that ride should have lived into a new generation. A few of those Epcot rides should have gotten the treatment that Spaceship Earth got, that they get adapted in like all of the classic attractions. That one, more than most, deserved that treatment.
Yeah, we've said that in the past on our Imagination episodes, that of all the rides that sort of deserve to become an evergreen sort of staple of the Disney park experience, an eternal staple, yeah. Imagination sure was one, because it was timeless. It was timeless. You could have replaced a little bit at the end with the imaging technology. You could spruce that up, updated that a little bit. But overall, I mean, it would be just as good today as it was back then.
It'd be on par. Those, a couple of Magic Kingdom attractions, Haunted Mansion Pirates, those kind of great opus attractions. So, alas, it's part of... It's kind of amazing that Spaceship Earth has endured as it has, in such a prominent...
So wonderful. And living with the land as well. Those greenhouses are
right.
So great. But yes, Spaceship Earth still holding down the fort.
It's just the nature of that park, I feel like, to just rip stuff out and want to do a new thing instead of keeping and adapting. So I found myself agreeing with Bob and his, he did not hold back on his opinions, Michael.
No, and we always appreciate a candid from somebody who was there on the ground and lived through it, a candid take on things. It's
Tell
always
us
welcome.
How you really feel.
Exactly.
That's all we're saying. And you too, listener, tell us how you really feel. You should email us. Tell us how you feel. Podcast at progresscityusa.com. We love to hear from you. And, it was, we're always listening and adapting. We're not ripping it out. We're updating the endings, right, Michael?
That's right. Yeah. We're giving it a fresh coat of paint.
We're plussing. We're
exactly.
not, we're not in the business of throwing out stuff. Let's, So yeah, email us. You can find us on Blue Sky, although, you can really find us on Patreon, right, Michael?
That's right. We talked about it at the start of the episode, but you can get all sorts of benefits and early access, and join our exciting monthly live stream, which is just a good fun time with good fun people, and access all those old episodes too. Find out more at patreon.com/Progress City USA.
But you get into the Discord world with the Patreon.
Oh, you get in. I didn't even mention the
That's
Discord.
what I'm
You
saying.
get access to
That's
the
where
Discord.
you find us.
That is where you find us. We've been having a lot of fun on there with a lot of the same people from the chat from the live stream. And you want to talk Disney parks, books, music, anything, stuff that doesn't have anything to do with any of that. We've had people talking World Cup. We've had people talking Stanley Cup. So yeah, I'll be talking College World Series, hopefully. So it's a lot of fun. So do join us. Any level gets you into the Discord, and it's fun.
All right, Michael. Well, anything to say before we sign off from this town hall meeting?
No, I just like to thank Bob again, and looking forward. I'm really excited for what we've got coming up, really resuming our cadence a little bit and getting back on track there, and some fun ideas for the rest of the year.
That's right. And we thank you all for being a part of it. As always, thanks for listening today, and we look forward to joining you next time. So long, everyone.